You think the Mongols only conquered nations? They also conquered intimacy itself. Imagine a world where your wedding night was a tactical military operation witnessed by shamans chanting fertility prayers, where empire expansion meant collecting wives from every conquered territory like political chess pieces, where spiritual ecstasy wasn't just worship but state policy, and your bedroom performance could determine whether your clan survived winter. This isn't fantasy. This was imperial protocol. The same warriors who burned Baghdad to ashes also participated in sacred fertility rituals involving mare's milk and ancestral spirits. The Khans who ruled from the Pacific to the Danube didn't just reshape the map. They rewrote the rules of human intimacy in ways that would make modern society collectively faint. What you're about to discover are the strangest, most disturbing intimate practices of the Mongolian Empire. The side of Genghis Khan your textbooks deliberately omitted, from bride kidnapping as courtship ritual to shamanic sex ceremonies that supposedly summoned rain, from imperial harems that functioned as intelligence networks to punishments for adultery that make medieval Europe look merciful. We're going to journey through the Mongol world where privacy didn't exist, where every union served the empire, and where the line between sacred and profane was drawn in mare's blood under the eternal blue sky. This is history at its most uncomfortable, most fascinating, and most revealing about human nature itself. Let's begin where every Mongol marriage began, with thundering hooves and a woman's scream echoing across the steppe. Picture this. It's 1220 on the Mongolian steppe. A young woman named Kutulun tends sheep near her family's gur when she hears hoofbeats approaching fast. She turns to see a warrior bearing down on her at full gallop. Before she can react, he sweeps her onto his saddle. Her family erupts from their dwelling, not in panic but in approval, shooting arrows skyward in celebration. This isn't an attack. This is a proposal. Bride kidnapping, or alakachu, as it would later be called in the Turkic regions the Mongols influenced, was standard Mongol courtship protocol. But here's what makes it truly bizarre. It existed in a strange liminal space between consensual theater and actual abduction. Sometimes the bride knew it was coming, had even orchestrated it with her intended. Other times, she genuinely had no idea, learning her husband's identity only after the ritual was complete. The warrior who successfully abducted a bride had to demonstrate multiple qualifications simultaneously. He needed horsemanship skilled enough to grab a moving target while riding at full speed. He required strength to control both horse and captive. He had to possess enough wealth to compensate her family afterward. Most importantly, he needed courage because her male relatives would chase him, and if they caught him before he reached his family's territory, the marriage was void, and he faced serious consequences. This wasn't some barbaric practice conducted by ignorant nomads. This was calculated social engineering. The Mongols understood something modern society has forgotten. Marriage wasn't about individual romance. It was about genetic strength, clan alliances, and resource consolidation. A man who could successfully abduct a bride proved he possessed the qualities needed to protect her and their future children in the brutal steppe environment. The bride's role was equally calculated. She was expected to resist, to fight, to make the abduction genuinely difficult. A woman who went too easily was considered undesirable, lacking the fierce spirit needed to raise warrior children. But a woman who fought too effectively and escaped risked being labeled unmarriageable, too wild even for Mongol standards. She had to calibrate her resistance perfectly, fierce enough to prove her worth, compliant enough to allow capture. Here's where it gets psychologically complex. Many historical accounts suggest that women often chose their abductors. A woman interested in a particular warrior would arrange to be in a specific location at a specific time, essentially staging her own kidnapping. She could then claim she was taken against her will, preserving her reputation while securing the husband she wanted. The entire community understood this dynamic but maintained the fiction because it served important social functions. The compensation negotiations afterward revealed the economic sophistication behind apparent chaos. The groom's family would arrive at the bride's family's ger-bearing gifts: horses, felt blankets, silver ornaments, and fermented mare's milk. The amount wasn't fixed by law but by negotiation, with the bride's beauty, skills, and family status determining her price. A particularly valuable bride might cost 50 horses, several camels, and a year's worth of dried meat. This wasn't buying a woman. It was compensating her family for losing her labor and childbearing capacity. Modern dating apps seem quaint by comparison. Today we swipe right based on carefully curated photos and witty bios. Mongol men had to physically prove their worth through an act that combined athleticism, courage, strategy, and social calculation. Imagine Tinder requiring you to complete an obstacle course while your match's family shoots at you. That was Mongol romance. But the truly disturbing element was what happened when bride kidnapping went wrong. If a warrior abducted a woman already promised to another man, or worse, already married, it could trigger blood feuds lasting generations. Entire clans would go to war over a stolen bride. The Mongols' most famous historical moment began with such an incident. Temujin's wife, Berta, was kidnapped by the Merkit tribe, an act of revenge for Temujin's father having kidnapped Temujin's mother years earlier. The cycle of bride theft and revenge raids shaped Mongol history itself. Some women never recovered from traumatic abductions. They lived their entire lives as captive wives, bearing children to men they hated, trapped by a system that gave them no recourse. Other women thrived, using their position to accumulate power, eventually becoming advisors to khans and influence brokers in their own right. The system was simultaneously empowering and devastating, often to the same individual. What makes this practice particularly strange is how it coexisted with Mongol women's relatively high status in other areas. Mongol women owned property, managed households, conducted business, and even ruled as regents. Yet, the method by which they entered marriage involved ritualized capture. The contradiction reveals something profound about Mongol psychology. They saw no conflict between respecting women's capabilities and treating courtship as conquest. In their worldview, strength deserved respect, regardless of how it was acquired. If you thought bride kidnapping was invasive, the wedding night itself was when privacy completely evaporated. Because for the Mongols, consummating a marriage wasn't a private romantic moment. It was a political and spiritual event requiring verification, blessing, and occasionally direct intervention. The wedding night preparations began at sunset with elaborate rituals that would horrify modern sensibilities. The bride and groom weren't simply led to their ger and left alone. They were prepared by their respective families in ceremonies that bordered on medical procedures. Female relatives would bathe the bride in mare's milk mixed with herbs believed to ensure fertility. They would check her body for signs of health, flexibility, and childbearing potential. Meanwhile, male relatives prepared the groom, ensuring he was in optimal physical condition, sometimes administering herbal stimulants if they doubted his capabilities. The shamanic blessing ceremony came next, and this is where Mongol intimacy departed completely from anything recognizable to modern audiences. The shaman, wearing elaborate costumes decorated with bones and bells, would enter the wedding ger while the couple waited outside. The shaman performed rituals to cleanse the space of malevolent spirits and invite ancestral blessings. This included burning sacred herbs, sprinkling mare's milk in the 4 cardinal directions, and chanting invocations to Tengri, the eternal blue sky god. Then the truly uncomfortable part began. The couple would be brought inside while family elders remained just outside the ger, not in the next ger over, not in a nearby tent. Immediately outside, separated only by felt walls that were deliberately thin for this occasion. The Mongols believed that successful consummation required the spiritual energy of the community, that the couple's union was strengthened by being witnessed, however indirectly, by their clan. The elders weren't just standing around, casually. They listened. They paid attention to sounds that indicated successful intimacy. They noted duration, intensity, and signs of completion. This wasn't voyeurism in the modern sense. It was spiritual and legal verification. A marriage unconsummated was no marriage at all, and the Mongols needed certainty. Some accounts describe shamans actually entering the jur during the wedding night to provide guidance. Imagine the scene. You're attempting intimacy for the first time with your new spouse. Already nervous, already overwhelmed, and a spiritual leader wearing animal bones walks in to offer advice on technique, positioning, and spiritual energy flow. The shaman would chant throughout, supposedly channeling divine energy to ensure fertility. The couple was expected to continue their activities while this happened. The morning verification was even more intrusive. Female relatives would enter at dawn to examine the bedding for evidence of consummation and the bride's virginity. They checked the bride's body for physical signs. They questioned both parties about the experience. This evidence would be presented to the broader community, with the soiled bedding sometimes displayed outside the jur as proof of successful union. For the Mongol aristocracy and khans, these practices intensified dramatically. When Genghis Khan's sons married, their wedding nights involved not just family elders but political advisors and military commanders. These marriages cemented alliances between clans, and everyone with a stake in that alliance needed assurance it was properly sealed. Multiple witnesses would be stationed around the wedding ger, some even inside, separated only by hanging felts. Historical records describe Ögedei Khan's wedding night in disturbing detail. His father, Genghis Khan himself, stood outside the ger with senior generals, listening to ensure his son adequately performed his duties. When sounds indicated success, Genghis reportedly laughed and declared his bloodline secure. The psychological pressure on Ögedei must have been immense, performing intimately while knowing his father and the empire's military leadership waited outside judging his capabilities. The consummation sometimes required multiple attempts. If the first night proved unsuccessful due to nervousness, incompatibility, or the sheer pressure of the situation, the couple would be required to try again the next night with even more witnesses present. Failure after 3 attempts could result in annulment, with the bride returned to her family and the groom humiliated before the entire community. But here's the disturbing logic behind these practices. The Mongols didn't see this as humiliation. They saw it as communal investment in the marriage's success. Modern weddings involve friends and family witnessing vows and celebrating afterward. Mongol weddings involve the community spiritually participating in the union itself. The couple wasn't supposed to feel embarrassed because intimacy wasn't private. It was sacred, communal, and essential to clan survival. The fertility emphasis explains much of this invasiveness. For nomadic people living harsh lives on the steppe, children meant survival. Every marriage needed to produce offspring quickly. The Mongols couldn't afford to wait years to discover a couple was infertile. They needed to know immediately that the union was physically successful and likely to produce children. The wedding night verification served as an early fertility test. Medical understanding, or rather misunderstanding, also played a role. Mongol healers believed that spiritual energy from witnesses enhanced fertility. They thought ancestral spirits needed to be present at conception to guide the child's spirit into the mother's body. Privacy would exclude these spirits, resulting in weak or sickly children. Therefore, witness consummation wasn't just preferred, it was medically necessary. Some couples developed strategies to cope with this lack of privacy. They would arrange signals with relatives, indicating when witnesses should move further away or when blessing chants could cease. Experienced married couples would coach nervous newlyweds, teaching them how to maintain intimacy despite the presence of others. Some would consume fermented mare's milk to reduce anxiety, though this carried its own risks of impaired performance. The truly heartbreaking cases involved couples who simply couldn't perform under these conditions. Young people who genuinely loved each other but found the pressure impossible. These marriages would be annulled, the young people separated, often never seeing each other again. The community's need for verified fertility overrode individual emotional connections. Compare this to modern honeymoons, where the biggest intrusion might be a hotel staff member asking if you need extra towels. We take for granted that our intimate lives are our own business. We assume privacy is a human right. The Mongols would have found this assumption bizarre and dangerous. How can the community invest in a marriage they haven't verified? How can ancestors bless a union conducted in secret? How can fertility be ensured without proper spiritual oversight? Here's where the Mongol system reveals its strange internal contradictions. The same culture that treated wedding nights as public spectacles also produced some of history's most politically powerful women. And their power often derived directly from their intimate relationships with Khans. Berta Ujing, Genghis Khan's primary wife, exemplified this paradox perfectly. She was abducted by enemies early in her marriage, held captive for months, and returned pregnant with uncertain paternity. In most societies, this would have ruined her. In Mongol culture, her ability to survive captivity and return to her husband made her formidable. Genghis Khan accepted her son Joshi without question, and Berta became his closest advisor, managing the empire's internal affairs while he conquered the world. Berta's political power derived directly from her intimate connection to Genghis Khan. She controlled access to him, determining which officials could present petitions. She managed the distribution of wealth from conquests. She arranged marriages for her children and grandchildren, building a network of alliances that held the empire together. When Genghis Khan died, it was partly Berta's influence that ensured smooth succession. She accomplished all this from a position initially defined by her intimate relationship to the Khan. Sorgatani Beki, a Nestorian Christian princess who married Genghis Khan's youngest son, took this dynamic even further. After her husband's death, she ruled his territory as regent, refusing remarriage offers that would have subordinated her to another man. She managed one of the empire's wealthiest regions, investing in infrastructure and trade routes. She placed 3 of her 4 sons on various thrones, including Kublai Khan, who would eventually rule China. All of this stemmed from her strategic use of her position as a Khan's widow. The key insight is that Mongol women understood intimacy as political currency. While the wedding night might be public and invasive, what happened in the years afterward in the privacy of the marital ger gave wives enormous influence. A clever woman could use intimate moments to shape policy, arrange appointments, and redirect resources. The bedroom was, quite literally, where imperial decisions were made. Turajane Khatun demonstrated this with remarkable boldness. When her husband Urgadai Khan descended into alcoholism and depression, she essentially governed the empire from her position as his wife. After his death, she ruled as regent for 5 years, purging officials loyal to other factions and installing her own son as Great Khan. She accomplished a political coup without commanding armies, using instead the authority derived from her intimate connection to the previous Khan. This created a strange dual reality for elite Mongol women. On one hand, their entry into marriage involved ritualized abduction and witnessed consummation, treating them as vessels for clan fertility. On the other hand, once married, they wielded enormous power, often ruling vast territories and commanding respect from hardened warriors. The system simultaneously objectified and elevated them. The harem system, which the Mongols adopted and adapted from conquered peoples, further complicated these dynamics. A Khan might have dozens of wives and concubines, creating a complex hierarchy of women competing for influence. The primary wife held official status, but a favored concubine might wield more actual power through intimate access. These women formed factions, allied with different generals and officials, and engaged in political warfare that was no less deadly for being conducted in domestic spaces. Hutulun, a 13th century Mongol princess and warrior, represents perhaps the ultimate expression of these contradictions. Granddaughter of Kublai Khan, she fought in battles alongside men and was reportedly undefeated in wrestling. She declared she would only marry a man who could defeat her in combat, with losers forfeiting horses to her. She accumulated thousands of horses this way before eventually marrying on her own terms. She wielded military power while also existing within a system that theoretically subordinated women through marriage rituals. What made these powerful women possible in Mongol society? Several factors converged. First, nomadic life required women to be competent and tough. They managed entire households while men were away on campaigns, sometimes for years. They needed to defend against raids, organize migrations, and make life or death decisions. This practical competence translated into political competence. Second, Mongol inheritance laws were relatively egalitarian. Women could inherit property, including livestock and trade goods. A wealthy widow might control more resources than many men. Economic power translated into political influence. Third, the Mongols pragmatically recognized that talent had no gender. If a woman demonstrated capability in administration, warfare, or diplomacy, they utilized those skills. The empire was too vast to waste competent people based on arbitrary gender restrictions. But the fundamental source of female power remained intimate access to male rulers. A woman who could influence her husband in private moments could shape policy. A mother who controlled access to her son, the Khan, could effectively rule. The bedroom was the ultimate seat of power because that's where rulers were most vulnerable, most human, most persuadable. This makes modern debates about gender and power seem almost quaint. Today, we argue about whether women should be in corporate boardrooms and political offices. Mongol women ruled empires from their sleeping quarters while also being subject to public wedding night inspections. They were simultaneously empowered and constrained in ways that defy easy categorization. The tragic element is that this power remained contingent on intimate relationships with men. A woman's influence evaporated if her husband died and she had no powerful sons. Even the most capable female regent ruled only until a male heir came of age. The system allowed women to exercise power but never fully own it. Now we enter the truly alien territory of Mongol intimacy. The fusion of sexuality with shamanic spirituality in ways that would seem blasphemous to most modern religious sensibilities. For the Mongols, intimate ecstasy wasn't separate from spiritual ecstasy. They were the same experience, different expressions of the same divine force. The shamanic worldview saw sexuality as a channel for divine communication. During trance states induced by drumming, dancing, and sometimes fermented mare's milk, shamans would experience what they described as spiritual union with ancestral spirits or nature deities. The language they used to describe these experiences was explicitly erotic. They spoke of being penetrated by divine force, of spiritual climax, of merger with the cosmos that was simultaneously intimate and transcendent. Some shamanic rituals involved actual physical intimacy as spiritual practice. During certain seasonal ceremonies, particularly those invoking fertility for livestock herds, shamans would designate specific couples to engage in ritual intercourse at prescribed times and places. This wasn't orgiastic abandon. It was carefully choreographed spiritual technology. The couple's union supposedly channeled divine energy into the material world, ensuring abundant grass growth, healthy animals, and prosperous clan life. The fertility ceremonies conducted in spring reveal how deeply the Mongols connected sexuality to survival. As the steppe came alive after brutal winter, shamans would perform rituals to ensure horses and cattle reproduced successfully. These ceremonies sometimes involve symbolic or actual human intimacy conducted in view of the herds. The Mongols believed animals learned fertility behavior from humans, and that human sexual energy spiritually encouraged animal reproduction. The most disturbing shamanic practices involve something historians delicately call sacred transgression. Shamans occasionally prescribed ritual adultery or partner swapping as spiritual medicine. If a couple struggled with infertility, the shaman might determine that spiritual energy blockages prevented conception. The prescribed cure might involve the wife ritually coupling with another man, sometimes a shaman himself, to break the blockage and allow fertility to flow. The husband was expected not just to permit, but to participate spiritually, maintaining ceremonial presence during the ritual. These prescriptions weren't casual affairs or excuses for misconduct. They involved elaborate ceremonies with specific timing based on lunar cycles and astrological observations. The sacred partner had to be carefully selected, sometimes based on birth signs, sometimes based on spiritual characteristics the shaman discerned. The ritual intercourse happened in sacred spaces prepared with specific herbs and accompanied by continuous chanting. Failure to follow the prescribed ritual exactly meant the spiritual medicine wouldn't work. What makes this particularly strange is that adultery outside these shamanic prescriptions was severely punished, as we'll see later. The same society that might execute someone for unauthorized extramarital relations could mandate ritual intimacy with a non-spouse if a shaman prescribed it. The difference lay entirely in spiritual authorization. Sexuality was sacred when properly channeled, demonic when not. The ecstatic dances provide another window into this spiritual eroticism. Shamans would dance for hours, their movements becoming increasingly frenzied and explicitly sexual. They would mime coupling with spirits, their bodies contorting in ways that suggested both spiritual torment and ecstatic pleasure. Observers described these performances as simultaneously arousing and terrifying, witnessing what appeared to be intimate union with invisible forces. Mare's milk played a curious role in these ceremonies. Fermented arag was mildly alcoholic and mildly hallucinogenic when consumed in large quantities. Shamans would drink enormous amounts before ceremonies, entering altered states where they claimed to perceive the spirit world directly. They would then spray arag from their mouths onto couples seeking fertility blessings, the liquid contact serving as a transfer of spiritual potency. The phallic symbolism of spray and penetration was not subtle. The Mongols also practiced something modern anthropologists call sympathetic magic in their round, intimate rituals. If a woman wanted to conceive a son, she might be instructed to sleep on wolf pelts, wolves being masculine symbols of ferocity. If a man suffered from intimate dysfunction, he might be required to eat specific animal organs known for virility, particularly concerning given their nomadic diet. The line between spiritual practice and crude folk medicine was non-existent. Certain shamanic lineages were specifically dedicated to intimate and fertility matters. These specialists, often women past childbearing age, maintained knowledge of herbs, rituals, and techniques passed down through generations. They would be consulted before marriages, after failed pregnancies, during fertility struggles, and when intimate problems arose. They combined spiritual authority with practical knowledge, serving as a combination of sex therapist, marriage counselor, and mystical physician. The most powerful shamans claimed to be capable of shaping children's characteristics before conception. Through elaborate rituals conducted during the couple's intimacy, supposedly the shaman could influence whether the child would be male or female, warrior or healer, fierce or gentle. Parents desperately wanting sons would pay substantial amounts for these rituals. Whether they worked is obviously questionable, but the belief was absolute. The connection to Tengri, the eternal sky god, added another dimension to this spiritual sexuality. The Mongols believed Tengri witnessed all acts of intimacy, judging whether they served the cosmic order. Proper sexual conduct aligned with Tengri's will and brought blessings. Improper conduct invited divine punishment in the form of infertility, stillbirths, or weak children. Every intimate encounter carried metaphysical weight. This theological framework meant Mongols experienced intimacy very differently than cultures where sexuality was considered shameful or sinful. They weren't sneaking around, feeling guilty. They were participating in cosmic regeneration, channeling divine creative force. An act modern society considers private and slightly embarrassing was, for the Mongols, participation in sacred cosmic cycles. The missionary position wasn't just practical. It was supposedly the alignment that best channeled sky energy downward through the man into the woman, combining male sky power with female earth power to create balance. Alternative positions might be prescribed for specific purposes, but were seen as potentially disrupting this cosmic flow. Compare this to virtually any other major religion's view of sexuality. Christianity saw it as tainted by original sin, necessary for reproduction but inherently flawed. Islam hedged it with elaborate rules and restrictions. Buddhism often treated it as attachment to be transcended. Only the Mongols, among major civilizations, made sexuality itself a form of worship, a channel of divine power, a technology for communing with the cosmos. This makes modern tantric sex workshops look like amateur hour. Contemporary Western spirituality tries to reclaim sexuality's sacred dimension, but it's a reconstruction, an attempt to recover something lost. For the Mongols, there was no separation to overcome. The sacred and the sexual were always already the same reality. The Mongols didn't just spiritualize sexuality. They also medicalized it in ways both surprisingly sophisticated and disturbingly crude. Their pharmacopoeia of intimate enhancement and fertility treatment reads like a cross between modern medicine and complete superstition. The foundation of Mongol sexual medicine was the theory of vital energy flowing through the body. They believed intimate capability derived from strong life force, maintained through proper diet, adequate rest, and spiritual balance. Weakness in intimate matters indicated larger health problems requiring comprehensive treatment. This holistic view meant Mongol healers treated intimate dysfunction not as an isolated problem but as a symptom of systemic imbalance. Horse-based remedies dominated Mongol medicine for obvious reasons. They lived with horses, understood horse anatomy intimately, and saw horses as exemplars of strength and fertility. Mare's milk wasn't just food. It was medicine administered for everything from digestive troubles to intimate enhancement. Fresh mare's milk mixed with specific herbs was prescribed for men struggling with performance, the theory being that consuming the essence of powerful female horses would strengthen male energy. More disturbingly, certain horse organs were considered powerful aphrodisiacs and fertility treatments. The reproductive organs of particularly virile stallions would be dried, ground into powder, and mixed into fermented milk. Men would consume this before attempting conception, believing it transferred the stallion's potency directly into human form. Women seeking fertility might consume similar preparations from proven mare mothers. The herbal knowledge was actually quite sophisticated. Mongol healers used ginseng, imported from Chinese territories, recognizing its actual effects on energy and blood flow. They employed various steppe plants with genuine medicinal properties: saxaw for stamina, feathergrass for fertility, wormwood for cooling, excessive desire. The problem was they combined genuinely effective herbs with complete nonsense, making it impossible to distinguish treatment from placebo. Temperature theory governed much of Mongol intimate medicine. They believed bodies could be too hot or too cold for optimal intimate function. A man with insufficient desire was considered cold-natured and needed heating treatments. Spicy foods, vigorous exercise, sleeping with heating stones near his core. A man with excessive desire but poor performance was hot-natured, requiring cooling herbs and avoiding stimulating foods. Women's fertility was similarly categorized, with cold wombs needing warming and hot wombs requiring cooling. This led to some bizarre treatments. A woman struggling to conceive might be prescribed to sit over steaming pots of warming herbs, the theory being that heat and medicinal vapors would penetrate her body and prepare her womb for conception. Multiple sessions over several weeks were common. The reverse treatment, sitting over snow or ice mixed with cooling herbs, was prescribed for women considered too hot, whose bodies supposedly rejected pregnancy due to excessive internal heat. The massage treatments reveal surprising anatomical knowledge wrapped in spiritual language. Healers would perform abdominal and pelvic massages on both men and women, supposedly to unblock energy channels, but actually improving blood flow and reducing tension. Some of these techniques closely parallel modern physical therapy approaches, suggesting genuine empirical observation beneath the mystical language. Psychological dimensions were also recognized, though described in spiritual terms. A man might be diagnosed with spirit intrusion, meaning anxiety or trauma was blocking his intimate capabilities. Treatment involved shamanic ceremonies to expel the intrusive spirit, combined with counseling sessions where the healer would discuss the man's fears and concerns. This was primitive psychotherapy disguised as spiritual healing. For women, many treatments focused on increasing sensitivity and responsiveness. Recognizing that female satisfaction mattered for conception, healers prescribed warming oils applied to intimate areas made from animal fats mixed with herbs. They taught breathing techniques to help women relax. They counseled couples on position variations and timing. Stripped of mystical language, this was genuine sex therapy. But then there were the treatments that were pure danger. Mercury compounds were used occasionally, borrowed from Chinese medicine, supposedly to increase potency. They probably caused poisoning instead. Lead salts appeared in some fertility treatments with predictable toxic results. Arsenic in tiny doses was prescribed as a stimulant, walking the razor edge between medicinal and lethal dosing. The most elaborate treatments involved multi-week protocols combining diet, herbs, spiritual ceremonies, and behavioral modifications. A couple struggling with fertility might spend 3 months following strict regimens, specific foods consumed at specific times, daily herb preparations, weekly shamanic blessings, prescribed intimate practices on optimal lunar days. The comprehensiveness of treatment, regardless of actual effectiveness, demonstrated the Mongols took reproductive health seriously. Animal organ transplantation wasn't actual surgery, but ceremonial incorporation. A man might be given the heart of a wolf to consume, supposedly transferring lupine, courage, and virility. The kidney of a ram, known for prodigious breeding, might be prepared as medicine for fertility. These practices reflect deep belief in vital essence transferring through consumption. Timing protocols were incredibly specific. Healers maintained detailed knowledge of lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and even daily variations in energy, prescribing optimal moments for intimate activity. Conception attempts were scheduled with astronomical precision. This wasn't entirely superstitious. Circadian rhythms and seasonal fertility variations are real, though the Mongols attributed them to cosmic forces rather than biological mechanisms. The preventive medicine also existed, though less documented. Women with many children seeking to avoid further pregnancy had limited options. Nursing continued for several years, partly as natural contraception. Certain herbs with genuine contraceptive or abortifacient properties appeared in the medical knowledge, though discussing them openly was dangerous. The line between preventing pregnancy and causing miscarriage was theologically fraught. Compare Mongol intimate medicine to medieval European approaches. While European physicians were theorizing about wandering wombs and four humors, Mongol healers were performing what amounted to primitive pelvic physical therapy. While European medicine prescribed prayer and abstinence for intimate problems, Mongols were trying various herbs and techniques with at least some empirical basis. Both were wrong about fundamental anatomy and physiology, but the Mongol approach was more pragmatically oriented toward actual solutions. This makes modern pharmacology look miraculous by comparison. Today, we have medications that actually work based on genuine understanding of biological mechanisms. We've separated effective treatments from superstition, but we've also lost something the Mongols understood: the holistic integration of physical, psychological, and social factors in intimate health. Modern medicine treats symptoms. Mongol medicine, for all its flaws, tried to treat whole persons. Now we reach perhaps the most politically calculated aspect of Mongol sexuality: the imperial harem as instrument of governance, intelligence gathering, and cultural consolidation. This wasn't about one man's gratification. This was state policy conducted through intimate relationships. Genghis Khan established the precedent by taking wives and concubines from virtually every people he conquered. This wasn't random lust, it was deliberate strategy. A Khan with wives from multiple ethnicities demonstrated the empire's diversity while also gaining intimate access to different cultures' perspectives and information. Each woman came with knowledge of her people's customs, languages, weaknesses, and resources. The bedroom doubled as intelligence briefing room. The numbers involved were staggering. Genghis Khan may have had as many as 500 wives and concubines over his lifetime. His sons and grandsons continued this practice on similar scales. Kublai Khan's harem in China reportedly contained thousands of women. These weren't all intimate partners in any meaningful sense. Many were political captives, symbolic possessions, or administrative functionaries who happened to be female and attached to the royal household. The organizational structure was remarkably sophisticated. The harem wasn't a chaotic collection of jealous women competing for attention. It was a bureaucracy with clear hierarchy, designated roles, and professional management. The senior wife held official position with real authority. Below her were ranked wives by order of marriage or importance of their natal families. Concubines occupied lower positions, subdivided by origin, attractiveness, and favor. Each tier had specific duties and privileges. Senior wives managed household affairs, controlled budgets, and exercised political influence. Middle-tier wives might manage specific departments: food preparation, textile production, child rearing. Lower concubines performed domestic labor or served ornamental purposes during ceremonies. The most disfavored might never see the Khan at all, living their entire lives as captive non-persons. The Chinese influence, once Mongols conquered that civilization, formalized and elaborated these arrangements. Chinese imperial harem traditions, already ancient and complex, merged with Mongol practices to create hybrid systems. Kublai Khan's court incorporated Chinese concubine selection processes, regional searches for beautiful women, formal examinations of appearance and deportment, training schools for chosen candidates. The training deserves particular attention. Women selected for imperial harems didn't simply show up and hope for the best. They underwent extensive preparation: language lessons, cultural education, intimate techniques, political awareness, and behavioral conditioning. They were being prepared not just as companions, but as representatives of their peoples and potential mothers of princes. The training could last years before a woman even met the Khan. Sexual scheduling in these enormous harems required Byzantine logistics. Officials maintained rotation systems, ensuring the Khan regularly saw different wives while maintaining the hierarchy. Senior wives had regular scheduled nights. Lesser wives had monthly slots. Concubines might wait years for a single night. Menstruation, pregnancy, and illness complicated schedules further, requiring constant adjustment. The fertility implications were enormous. With hundreds or thousands of women potentially bearing children, determining paternity and managing the resulting offspring became major administrative challenges. Record keepers meticulously documented every intimate encounter, noting dates, participants, and observable outcomes. When a woman became pregnant, officials could consult records to confirm paternity, essential for inheritance purposes. This created strange situations where children grew up knowing their father was the Khan but having no personal relationship with him. They might meet him a handful of times in their entire lives. Their mother's status in the harem hierarchy determined their own prospects more than their father's identity did. A son of a senior wife had real power potential. A son of a low concubine might live and die in comfortable captivity, acknowledged but ignored. The intelligence gathering function was perhaps the harem's most politically important role. Women from different conquered territories brought news, perspectives, and information about their homelands. Smart Khans recognized this and actively debriefed their wives. A Rus princess might reveal internal conflicts among Russian principalities. A Persian noble's daughter could explain Iranian political factions. A Chinese concubine might understand administrative systems the Mongols were trying to implement. Some women became active intelligence agents. They maintained correspondence with their families back home, gathering information that they shared with the Khan. They might be sent back temporarily to their natal territories on diplomatic missions, using their intimate connection to the ruler to negotiate or spy. The harem was an intelligence network disguised as a domestic arrangement. The competition within harems could turn deadly. Women vied for the Khan's attention not just for personal reasons, but for survival. A favored concubine might be elevated to wife status. Her children could become princes with real power. Her family back home might receive preferential treatment. The stakes were existential, and women played for keeps. Poisonings, accusations of witchcraft, political conspiracies, harem, intrigue was blood sport with smiles. Cultural mixing in these harems produced fascinating hybrid offspring. Children of Mongol Khans and Chinese princesses, Persian nobles and Rus aristocrats, Turkish warriors and Indian royalty. These children embodied the empire's diversity, speaking multiple languages from infancy, practicing different religions, navigating multiple cultural identities. They became natural diplomats and administrators, comfortable in diverse contexts, but the human cost was immense. Most women in imperial harems lived lives of comfortable captivity. They had material security but no freedom. They couldn't leave, couldn't choose partners, couldn't pursue independent lives. Many never even fulfilled the supposed purpose of their captivity. They never bore children, never achieved favor, simply aged in gilded prisons. Some went mad. Others found purpose in the harem's internal politics. A few achieved real power through children who became rulers. The system also created bizarre family dynamics. Half-brothers might barely know each other, raised by different mothers in different sections of massive compounds. When succession crises erupted, as they frequently did, these half-brothers found themselves in life-or-death struggles against siblings they'd never bonded with. The harem's fragmentation of family loyalty contributed to the empire's eventual fracturing into competing khanates. The Mongol harem system influenced conquered territories profoundly. The practice spread to vassal states who imitated imperial customs. Regional khans established smaller harems. Even non-Mongol elites adopted the practice, seeing it as a mark of power and sophistication. The model of collection as conquest became normalized across Eurasia. Compare this to modern geopolitics. Today, nations demonstrate power through military might, economic leverage, and diplomatic influence. The Mongols added another dimension: intimate conquest. The Khan's ability to take women from every nation demonstrated total dominance more viscerally than any treaty. It was empire written on bodies, literally incorporating conquered peoples into the ruler's household. Modern sensibilities recoil from this, seeing only exploitation and objectification. And certainly those elements existed, but some women in these harems exercised remarkable agency within constraints, carved out spaces of influence, shaped policy, and changed history. Dismissing them as mere victims erases their actual historical complexity. The strangest aspect is how unremarkable this seemed to contemporary observers. Foreign diplomats visiting Mongol courts matter-of-factly noted the harem's size and organization without particular moral outrage. It was simply how powerful rulers lived. The idea that a leader should have only one spouse would have seemed bizarre, a waste of political opportunities. Chapter 7. Sacred Adultery and Forbidden Unions. Here we reach the most theologically complex aspect of Mongol intimacy. A society that simultaneously celebrated certain forms of extramarital sexuality while brutally punishing others. The difference lay entirely in context, purpose, and most critically, shamanic authorization. The concept of sacred adultery sounds like an oxymoron to modern ears, but for Mongols operating under shamanic worldview, it made perfect sense. If intimacy was a channel for divine energy, then sometimes divine energy required specific intimate pairings that violated conventional marriage bonds. When a shaman declared that the spirits demanded a particular coupling to heal illness, ensure rain, or prevent disaster, that coupling became sacred duty regardless of marital status. Historical accounts describe ceremonies where shamans would enter trance states and emerge, declaring that specific individuals must unite to restore cosmic balance. A married woman might be told she must couple with a particular warrior to prevent military defeat. A married man might be instructed to lie with a widow to ensure successful hunting. These weren't suggestions, they were divine commands carrying the weight of cosmic necessity. The ritual protocols surrounding these prescribed unions were elaborate. The couples involved weren't simply sent off to consummate. Ceremonies prepared them. Cleansing rituals purified them. Sacred spaces were designated, and the actual union occurred under shamanic supervision with continuous chanting and spiritual observation. The participants were understood as vessels for divine forces, not individuals pursuing personal desire. What makes this genuinely strange rather than merely hypocritical cover for adultery was the lack of pleasure or freedom involved. Participants in sacred transgressions were fulfilling terrifying spiritual obligations, not indulging desires. Many accounts describe reluctance, fear, and trauma. A woman designated for ritual union with a man not her husband experienced it as spiritual violation, however necessary. The cosmic implications made refusal unthinkable, but compliance wasn't enjoyable. The fertility magic aspect was particularly developed. When noble couples struggled to conceive after years of marriage, shamans might diagnose spiritual incompatibility their energies couldn't combine to create life. The prescribed solution might involve the wife ritually coupling with a man whose spiritual energy complemented hers, with the resulting child still considered her husband's legitimate heir. The husband was expected to participate spiritually, maintaining presence during the ritual and accepting the child. Some scholars argue these practices actually functioned as primitive genetic diversity mechanisms. Nomadic tribes risked inbreeding over generations. Shamanic prescriptions forcing couples outside normal marriage bonds introduced new genetic material, strengthening bloodlines even if the Mongols understood it in spiritual rather than genetic terms. The practice served biological function wrapped in mystical language. The timing of these prescriptions is revealing. They tended to occur during crises, prolonged drought, epidemic disease, military setbacks, or catastrophic livestock die-offs. When normal order failed, shamans would prescribe extraordinary measures, including ritual transgressions. This suggests the practices served psychological and social functions, providing communities with active responses to circumstances beyond their control. Partner selection for sacred unions followed complex spiritual logic. Birth signs, family totems, dream interpretations, and spiritual divination determined who should couple with whom. A woman born in a wolf year might need to unite with a man born in a horse year to balance predatory and productive energies. The shaman might dream of specific individuals designated by ancestral spirits. Physical attraction or personal preference were completely irrelevant. The offspring of these unions occupied ambiguous social positions. Officially, they belonged to their mother's husband, but everyone knew their actual paternity. Some became shamans themselves, their mixed spiritual heritage supposedly granting special powers. Others were subtly marginalized despite official acceptance. A few leveraged their unusual origins into unique roles as mediators or spiritual specialists. The psychological toll on participants must have been enormous. Imagine being commanded by religious and community authority to engage in intimacy with someone you might barely know while your spouse watches and prays, all because a shaman claims cosmic forces demand it. The trauma would be intense regardless of how sincerely you believed in the spiritual framework. Yet refusal was nearly impossible. Declining a shamanic prescription for sacred transgression meant rejecting divine will, risking not just community censure, but cosmic punishment. Crop failures, stillbirths, fatal accidents, anything bad that subsequently happened would be attributed to your refusal. The social and spiritual pressure made compliance nearly mandatory. What's most disturbing is how this practice coexisted with severe punishments for unauthorized adultery. A couple engaging in extramarital relations without shamanic blessing faced brutal consequences that we'll explore in the next section. The identical physical act could be cosmic necessity or capital crime, depending entirely on whether a shaman authorized it. The arbitrariness from a modern perspective is striking. This theological framework created opportunities for abuse. A clever or corrupt shaman could use spiritual authority to coerce sexual access. A powerful warrior might arrange for a shaman to receive divine instruction, designating a particular woman for ritual union. The system's logic made distinguishing genuine spiritual practice from exploitation nearly impossible. Some historical accounts suggest women occasionally turned this system to their advantage. A woman trapped in an abusive or unwanted marriage might convince a sympathetic shaman to prescribe ritual union with a man she actually loved. The resulting pregnancy would be officially her husband's, but actually her chosen partner's. This required enormous risk and manipulation, but desperate people find creative solutions. The practice gradually disappeared as Mongols converted to more organized religions. Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity all rejected the concept of sacred adultery, absolutely. As these faiths spread through Mongol territories, shamanic sexual practices were condemned as demonic. By the 14th century, the practice existed only in remote areas, still following traditional shamanism. Modern Tantric Buddhism preserves faint echoes of these practices in highly symbolic form. Ritual union imagery appears in Tibetan Buddhist art and practice, but understood as visualization and metaphor rather than literal physical acts. The Mongols, characteristically, were far more literal and physical in their spiritual sexuality. The Mongol Empire fell, but its legacy persists in unexpected ways. Every time intimacy becomes political scandal. Every time power uses sexuality as leverage. Every time we pretend private choices have no public implications. We're living in the world the Mongols helped create, even as we congratulate ourselves on having evolved beyond their barbarism. Maybe the real lesson is humility. We're not so different from people we consider primitive. We've refined our methods, sanitized our language, hidden our violence behind institutional facades. But the fundamental dynamics, bodies as territories, intimacy as power, desire as resource, these remain constant across civilizations. So next time you swipe on a dating app, remember the Mongol warrior thundering across the steppe to abduct his bride. Next time you attend a wedding, remember the nobles crowded around a royal bedchamber listening for consummation. Next time you judge someone's intimate choices, remember the execution grounds where the Mongols killed for unauthorized sexuality. We haven't escaped the empire of flesh. We've just built it with different materials, silicon instead of felt, code instead of shamanic chants, algorithms instead of dowry, negotiations. The eternal blue sky remains, and beneath it, humans continue their endless dance of desire, control, transcendence, and power. History isn't something that happened to other people in the past. It's the foundation we stand on, the patterns we repeat, the questions we keep failing to answer. The Mongols conquered the world and conquered intimacy. We inherited both conquests. Whether we've learned anything from them remains an open question.